Shirley here with Sirius Talisman, and look at this ascendant conjuncting Black Moon Lilith. Sol hour, Saturn day, Sun 11 degrees in the 12th house in Libra with Venus 18 degrees Virgo, separating from conjunction to Ketu and sextiling Black Moon Lilith. Moon approaching from a lot in Pisces. Let's upload the previous part, and here is something. It has to do about visibility, social media, what to keep private and what to expose, and recovering from sexual boundary violation. Still watching that 30 Moon Tarot. Um, yeah, like it's almost like an academic course where people have to have a literature reference to what I'm saying. It's not intentional. Like it's just like I tend to think about something, then it resonates with something, then one of my favorite channelers comes up with something, and we would be on a certain wavelength and frequency that has like a conglomerate that's building something. And and the way I work is like the way I'm trained from academia is just to give credit to the things that prompted me to press record. This helps me to keep track on why I came up with certain energy, and it also helps my viewers to understand the context in which I am operating or the things that are associated with what I have to say. Now, here's the thing. Um, there is a topic about um, oh. Ah, hmm, okay. So this is really much the title of this episode is really much is pretty much what I hone in this episode, because there have been, let's just say that way, when Jupiter ingressed into Gemini. Now Jupiter is midway into Cancer. Jupiter returned for some folks. I know at least 3 people in around, not personally, but in around my energy, that have a Jupiter return with Jupiter Cancer. So one of them even Jupiter Procyon. So here's the thing. Wait with the sniffing Procyon. Wait a second. Um, when it comes to when Jupiter ingressed into Gemini, I was trying to go off completely social media and rethink the entire damn thing. Now Jupiter is going to go back to Gemini, and then the very energy that, and I remember I was coming back. There was something I was checking. I think it was on Instagram, and it would be from that energy that there would be attempts to close my accounts. So here's the thing: is the conjoining of me rethinking social media altogether, kind of closing everything, including like the cell phone, like the everythingness of that, and that won't correlated with that person being obsessed about my content, not wanting to show that public, and trying to control that by trying to shut down my social media. And that would be both as supposedly serving my growth and supposedly serving their ego. and but there is an but that goes to something that is unmanaged around speech and visibility, that is unmanaged because of an issue to do with sexual boundary violation and sexual sovereignty. As people recover, embody their relaxed arousal, their feminine, their healthy feminine, healthy masculine, and so on and so forth, then what they have, and this is also something that came out in therapy for me with a person that was completely MK Ultra to groom to be Epstein, okay? Um, and by the way, only very recently I addressed with the person that sent me to them. And that is not the balance between what to expose and what to hide, and how all exposure can also be like a coping mechanism of control. However, that is naturally aligning when people are recovering from sexual boundary violation. At first, they can't speak, then they can't stop speaking, and they oscillate until they begin to have that yin yang, healthy feminine, healthy masculine, sexual sovereignty, self trust, their boundaries being respected in spirit and in matter, and all the things that try to keep them from going there being exposed and nullified. Kind of like the devil doesn't have a place to dwell anymore. And as they do, they change the world. Because a world that has been bound to that devil or the lowest frequencies um, of energy addiction. Think about people that torture infants because their blood produces something, some endochrome thing that they produce from something in the blood that only comes up at high rates of adrenaline, which are due to those high rates of torture. That can connect with that high threshold of dopamine to have an orgasm that is a pain threshold rather than a pleasure threshold. That happens in people that were subjected to that type of violence. Whether they became perpetrators or whether they're going sadistic or masochistic about it, that's how it was created and was basically that frequency of being addicted to something that's more addicting than the harshest drugs, they say, and basically being addicted to torturing and building the business wealth consolidation around resources. Think about the fact that, peace negotiations, how do you appease some emperor to have peace is by giving them a couple of children that they can rape and torture and murder. That's not that peace is not peacing. But a state of perpetual war is also perpetuating that. Okay, Procyon. This is absolutely Procyon vibe. What's happening in this 28 Leo? Dat weet ik niet. Yeah, but this was so our. What's happening? I don't. I don't know. Anyway, um, and the courage and transmutation that is taken to talk about those things. Marigold. Tagetes, by the way, kills the fungi and develops healthy boundaries with oneself. Yes, I am going to sniff it in favor of those who ask. My Procyon Tagetes talisman, which is basically consecrating essential oil. Recording, not now. And that's actually needed. Okay. It's not people falling apart, it's fungi falling apart. The person is not going to fall apart. The fungi is going to fall apart. That's all. It feels like falling apart of the person. It's those toxic fungal structures. People that have been used to entrap people in toxic relationships because they were taught to survive by creating trauma bonds with everyone. That pattern, that toxic pattern, this fungal pattern, Pluto, Venus, hard aspects, that is what's being transmuted. And it's not the person falling apart, it's the toxic pattern falling apart. Stop trying to threaten to cut my throat. I understand that that's something that happens in the Masons. Wait a second. People are afraid of being decapitated. First of all, we know that that period ended up in the guillotine, and we know that transmuting that fungal structure internally finds more and more places, points of interference. No, trying to corrupt that energy is not going to help. This is the frequency that Tagetes is actually killing the fungi. It's not killing the people, but a person doesn't want to become too attached to those fungal structures. Now, here's the thing. It's not even about, hey, there are many children that were dying in those rituals and so on and so forth. It's about transmuting the fungal structure. Okay? And this is where, as one is beginning to heal, express, speak, change, then they begin to naturally balance into the correct balance between exposure and keeping something private. And that's almost inevitable. Why am I saying almost inevitable? The only way in which that can be sweetened or mitigated is actually addressing the connection to the nuclear holocaust, the connection to the denuclearification. The fact that no, getting more people high on endochrome is not going to bring world peace anymore. It has for centuries. Yes, but this different sky. And people are not going to be at peace with that type of supposed peace. Here, and I want to talk about another thing. Let's smell that again. And that is the word disgust. Disgust is about trying to push out something. But here is the thing. A person being on their recovery journey is pushing out certain things, and the feeling of disgust is purging that feeling of disgust. Begin to set a boundary. You want to think about disgust as this, as kind of like if there is a wound, then that little, you know, basically the inflammation around that is that feeling of disgust, that muck, and which Tagetes is very good for, by the way. And that is that feeling, okay? So people, now here's the thing, when person is encountering an actually embodiment of the feminine or embodiment of something, those feelings that prevent them from joy will come up. And that can bring that mucus thing, like that disgust, like something that is kind of like a wound that's been exploded and all the muck comes out. Okay? That's the disgust. And people can try to project that disgust onto another person. Unsuccessfully. And now, that purging of that disgust is necessary. But that purging, how should I say that? It's not something that one can project onto the person who's not the perpetrator in that case. Thank you. And I sneezed on that. Truth. This is the actual boundary. Because the disgust is kind of like that muck that allows for the wound to heal, to congeal and to heal. And feeling disgust, it means that certain wounds are congealing. And so there's an attempt to try to push that disgust, to push that something away, to push what disgusts them away. Now, if somebody has been the perpetrator in that sequence, then that is where them trying to push that disgust onto another person is not going to work. They're going to be handed over that disgust back because they're trying to project it onto someone that is not the actual perpetrator. Now, another person can bring that disgust for several reasons. One, they don't have access to the original wound. Two, that person was being used by a third party who tried to imitate that person. Or three, if that case was, let's say that person, no, but there was something. Oh, let me talk about that. Okay. When a person tries to connect into one's life energy and drain that, they're basically performing a dark occult ritual. Now, they are unlikely to be satisfied with the result of that dark occult ritual, particularly if they aim at something to do with the sexual energy. Okay? Think about even people that are doing lust magic, they are unlikely to be satisfied with the results if they are if even at least somewhat supposedly successful. Because then they are disgusted from themselves from doing that ritual. And that's the thing that people can't bring, how should I say that? Now here's the thing, because the circles of those dark occult have been expanding to people that never heard of that, even if they do astrology. Okay, for me, I was 40. I was kind of like this years old when I learned about the dark and Nazi occult that was done at the Madeleine time and how that affected my life personally. I had no idea of these things. So the thing is that those people, they would not even think to practice those rituals, even if from the fact that however lowly they felt in their lives, that was not even something that they were exposed to that is at all possible. So it's not even about being better or less than. It's kind of like that was not even on the menu. Whereas the people that were doing those rituals, there was almost nothing else on the menu. And now, as they encounter, as the veil is thinning, Saturn Neptune, and for some people, as Saturn returns, Saturn maturation, Saturn second Saturn returns, Saturn transits, and so on, or Saturn to the first house, whatnot, or ruler of ascendant. What's happening is basically, this is a very phototoxic well. I'm going to, yeah. Oh, I know what I'm going to do. Going to put it, oh no. Okay, to that candle. I'm not going to light the candle, I'm just going to smell the candle, the Procyon candle. And what's happening, people have certain sort of addictions, sex addictions. Think about the people that masturbate publicly or that, yeah, because that was the kind of energy that came up right now. And that brings disgust. So they try to make the other person feel disgust because they're feeling disgust, and they try to push it over to the other person. But that person, those single people, they have dealt with those timelines. And this is where the original perpetrators are the ones that are still trying to project disgust onto others. Now, there may be things that are associated with ritual abuse that were done in childhood and so on. And think about it, even when you have, let's say, parents and children, when both of them are traumatized, or even two partners, when both of them are traumatized, they can be kind of entities latching on to those wounds, creating a feeling of mutual disgust that is basically like the muck that is congealing and healing the permeability around their aura. But then what happens is they're going to be healed from that. And those that try to trap people in cycles of disgust, because boundaries are going to be reformed, that's why. And those that try to trap people in cycles of disgust are basically honing in on those frequencies because for them that wound still needs to congeal. And there can be disgust from the toxic femininity as well. Okay? Now, when it's adult people and they're trying to project that disgust to somebody that's recovering from something, they need to face the fact that what they're, even if they try to traffic an adult, they were trying to traffic a child because they needed to access their child self and fragment them. And that stirs up tremendous amount of shame and reckoning that that thing was done to them, which is why they wanted to be omnipotent and all-powerful. Now, here's the thing, that with the congealing of those wounds, the boundaries are formed irrevocably. And so the truth is coming out. But those people that try to expose, let's say, another figure, and they are also projecting, then they will have to face themselves in that equation as well. And then that wound congeals. Let's say when a person was brought into perpetual trauma, and then something happened that was psychically attacking them, then they know that energy. For example, even when I was separated from the person I was cohabiting with, they told me, I feel the energy, they felt the energy of my psychologist. And it said, that's even worse than the energy you escaped from in academia. because they were saying I'm not like that person and blah blah blah, and then that person was my bestie back then said they're worse, and they felt that energy kind of possessing them, and they're like I feel that energy of that of that psychologist person, and this is why when I visited them like 3 or 4 years after I separated, I said, what did that psychologist do to you? And they said nothing. And I'm like, well, that means that you did that. They were like really pissed because perhaps they have succumbed to something while I was taking a path of further purification from those timelines, maybe they weren't. It's not about shame or blame. It's about that is one trajectory and that is another trajectory, and both have to transmute, okay? Transmute the fact that I'm not going for those timelines, and the more they attempt to put me in those timelines, basically the more they're being forced to be exposed for what they try to do to me. Because even as I go to the something's like, oh wait, that's a reckoning. Oh no, wait. What's happened there is that they were trying to siphon on my energy, which drained my energy, which made me susceptible to being psychically attacked. Now, they were also drained in their energy. But then if they chose a venue to the leverage that they had choice, or if they were more susceptible to be mind controlled towards some trajectory, instead of trying to get me to break down as well, rather than use me as an anchor to be inspired to align, then they are bringing an even bigger downfall on them. Because what they were trying to siphon and later traffic was a child. They needed to access the inner child of a person, even when that person is 30, 40, 50, 60, 70. That is how those satanic death cults work. They try to get at the child self, fragment the child self, contact with original traumas, perpetrate them, and then what they're trafficking is basically a child self. And this is how they also try to enslave people. Why do they turn to children? Because with adult people that are tackling their own shadow work and having their own gnosis healing and so on, they can see what's going on quicker than children, and then they have to put way more force, which is being exposed, targeted individuals worldwide, and the fact that the mission behind is to make them homeless and to traffic them. No, attempts to burn me, not going to help. Warlocks doing witchcraft, trying to project it onto other people and trying to burn other people is not going to do the deed. They're still going to have to deal with the fragment itself that is unifying, and their attempts to keep people trapped in the old timelines are being purged. All of those old timelines, those trafficking timelines, are shedding, like, and this is another thing. When it comes to authority, the place of a person in an organization, nobody cares about that anymore. It's like, yeah, that just means that they were closer to Epstein. The attempt to assess authority through narcissistic, gaslighting, energy draining ways is not working anymore. And that breeds disrespect towards those who try to traffic people or target individuals. The attempts to blame shift, to shift the energy, to try to embody that person, to do all those things. Now, here's what targeted individuals are already paid attention to. That's boring. It's the attempts to perpetuate a certain loops. Like, the only people that get stressed by that is those who still try to target people in that way. And the attempts to do psychological violence to people is still psychological violence. It's not the truth. An actual true channeling, true intuition is not depleting, depressing, and so on and so forth, but reconnects with truth. Those that try to harvest on somebody's light and transmute it into something that is dark are kind of like all those fungal structures coming. Think about when you tend to a fungi or to overgrowth of yeast. So what happening? You kill certain, for some people that treated cancer, it happens as well. You begin to mitigate the growth of a certain cancerous cell or a certain overgrowth of yeast. And then what happens? All the other cells are coming up to someone. It's like, hey, wait, what's happening? They're coming to protect themselves. They're coming to defend themselves. Like, Falcon, you've been growing in the wrong body. Now, all of us cells are going to have to die. Well, the cells, yes. The fungi, yes. The people, not necessarily. How attached do you want to be to being connected to overgrowth of yeast for your survival? That reminds me of something. I was doing my apprenticeship in aromatherapy, and naturally we use our besties, right? I mean, that's what friends are for. Okay? And one of the things that come with Louise Hay is about the person agreeing to give up what keeps them in suffering. So I thereby declare, I agree to give up what keeps me in that overgrowth yeast situation. And then what would be is that I would tell them something about removing the timeline of the Holocaust, to which a volcano erupted, and that volcano told me, you can't just say that to people. And here you are, saying that to people. Because they were siphoning energy on their path to performing war crimes, human trafficking, weird stuff for real estate, accessing somebody's child self to try to fragment them, keep a person from healing from yeast overgrowth, or tending to their teeth, which has to do with that. And by the way, the excess plaque can go to the heart and create like heart attacks. It's really interesting. Effectively trying to assassinate a person while trying to keep them alive. And I'm like, there I am, naively practicing being a holistic health practitioner, making an oil of new beginnings, and saying that, okay, because basically that was the answer to that question, to that declaration of they agreed to give up of what keeps them in that turmoil. Well, they need to remove the Holocaust timelines, because they were basically signed up to perpetuate the Holocaust. And he even told me, I feel like in past life maybe I was a Nazi. I'm like, okay, I'm not into Naziing. Now here's the thing. Those people whose job is to fragment or go about the line of fragmenting people, they have pieces of truth. They don't have the truth. And everybody's truth is different. However, when the people come from this fragmented place, they're not even in touch with their own truth. And then the closest to their own truth would be their fragmented self, which is a part of a reckoning. But why am I saying that to begin with is that when it comes to those people or those beings that try to psychologically abuse or do this MK often or whatnot, they're basically, as a person is dealing with the toxins in their body, what is naturally arising is more things that need to be cleansed and purified. Also, when it comes to, let's say, activism, I was an activist of people that were living in a hostel, juxtaposed to roommates that are not compatible with them. By the way, shout out to Caesar Girl. I think that episode did come to life. She was talking about compatible housing rather than the right tenants. And as I was tending to inform people that they have rights in the private sector to have subsidies for rent, and they don't have to live in that hostel, which requires them to work in a job they are also oppressed by, take medications that literally can kill them and cause heart attack. It was a person that was after some sort of something with the heart that I was talking to. And then I was exposed to the trafficking Epstein-like scams in the real estate. So there was like I was beginning to tend to people coming out of those hospital hostels that were not fit for them and were oppressive to their mental state basically and physical state. And then it was like, well, before those people go to the private sector, look at what's happening in your housing. And that was a trafficking place. And I'm like, okay, now that needs to be tended to. Then it was the rituals around wealth consolidation. Then it was the kidnapping of people from psychiatric hospitals, raping and sacrificing them and burying them alive in a construction site as a part of a ritual done by psychiatric nurses, male nurses, in Israel, being on the news. And the way I heard about it was a very good old friend of mine just has a post, very emotional post that said they buried her twice. And I'm like, what happened? I haven't seen the news. And then she connected me with that piece of information. By the way, that was the person that was paying attention that something was really off with my psychologist on time. And I actually shared that bit of information with my psychologist because I trusted him so much in that process. Um, Not his fault. He's been groomed to be an Epstein. I had to protect myself from my own psychologist. Um, and as you can see, by the time the false flag arrived, I was like, okay, those people that are those people that are supposed to protect us from the Holocaust, we're going through a Holocaust until they agree to perpetuate one. We probably are going to need to lean elsewhere to to change that situation. And And it's not about just paying taxes, because most of the people are in perpetual trauma. They need housing first. They need a place to stay. They're not able to work. And in fact, the people that escape trafficking are becoming more aware of the fact that it's not the wrong tenant, it's the wrong housing, and people are not meant to be cramped up in buildings. Now think 15-minute city. That after trauma, what are people? They're more agoraphobic, they're more claustrophobic. So they need a good balance between being next to a person and being alone. Okay, all these things basically operate on energy boundaries all the way to masonry boundaries. Look at this moon, slowly stepping up to form a cloud, tenderly aligning up with the fact that those things are also fragmenting spiritually, and the religious practices based on those fragmentations are approximations, including Christ. Inquisition is not saving. An inquisitor is not a savior. And this is why satanic ritual abuse worked on a ritual of taking an infant, torturing an infant, asking all the children to pray for that infant to their God, and then none of those prayers work, and then praying for Satan, saying, oh, Satan will save you. And these young children learn to be programmed with Satan instead of Jesus. And this thing in being entirely in lab conditions, so that their spirit will, and for many people it was like reconnecting with the closest approximation to love, so that was they weren't able to like have to access their relaxed arousal sexuality, and so they try to connect to the divine, they try to connect to Christ, try to connect to this, try to connect to that, and yet that embodied, the next phase is that embodied sensuality, and regaining that ability to be sensual with the self in a way that's not threatening. And that affects the speech, which is what I started this episode with, or the previous one. Look at the dissociation as I go through even the time, Saturn next to Neptune, okay, the time going missing, the time going, while talking about timelines, and how this association, and this is the thing, in certain classic psychiatric teachings, people would see a person speaking like that, and they would say, "Oh, this person is having weird things with the speech. They are recovering. They are recovering. They having associative speech because they are creating a cohesion in a dissociative state, and that speech is important to the recovery." And this is important also when it comes to what to expose, what to not expose. Because going off the radar basically means being susceptible to being abused in a way that is invisible. And being all in the spotlight is the other oscillation of that susceptibility. And yet there are certain people that serve as that beacon of light, that they're scheduled to heal publicly. This is why you would have people like Annika Lucas every other month for several years talking about the darkest things in humanity that she experienced. It's not because there's something wrong with her ability to expose or not expose. It's because she's serving a certain role of healing in public. A lot of the Rahu Chirons, particularly in Gemini, Mercury Rahus, Mercury related Chirons. Chiron Mercury co-present in the same sign. A lot of them have similar jobs. They're similar things. And it can be in ways that, let's say, it can be in ways that are not as obvious. It can be in energy ways, for example. And this is where Chiron to do with Sun, Chiron to do with Sun. Chiron Moon can be about the psychology and the emotional intelligence, or even housing in itself, nourishment, care, food that is actually nourishing, and so on, relational pattern. And Chiron with Sun can literally be about the visibility. Rahu Sun synastries. Sun Pluto, okay, power relations and visibility. But it has to do with being seen, and it has to do with speech. Now, there's some people like Tracy Chapman that had the wits to control her own narrative, going invisible when she needed, and so on. And this is one, and hiding things about her private life. This is one timeline. Not all timelines are the same. And aligning one's exposure versus privacy, visibility versus anonymity, control over the narrative versus surrendering the narrative is going to naturally align with those oscillations and with that regained sense of embodiment. Now, there are a lot of people that, in their trying to supposedly save a person from embarrassment, are actually trying to, actually not, okay, let's just say that they're doing that, not supposedly, are actually not aware that the standards for what is embarrassing are completely shifting. And the attempts to make it embarrassing to be a feminine woman connected to her, sense of embodiment, are only exposing the timelines behind them. And those timelines are of beyond war crimes and beyond crimes against humanity, even. In effect, those timelines are such that if they don't get exposed by the light of the sun, they're going to turn into an A bomb, which has a lot of, think about an A bomb. It's a very plutonian explosion, very powerful explosion that has a ton of radiation. Think about the sun Pluto. Okay, Pluto exploded. The Hiroshima and Nagasaki exploded with the ingress of Pluto to Leo, trining Aries. So think about a lot of these people that are recovering from those things that would have perpetuated another Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They're like dropping bombs. They're dropping A bombs on the level of a psychological. And those A bombs need to be dropped for the physical A bombs to not be dropped. There are some people that scream out, and if they wouldn't scream, in Hebrew the word for scream is litzroach, and it is synonymous with the word lirtzoach, which is to murder. If a person wouldn't scream, they would murder. So a person being silenced and oppressed becomes murderous with their rage. In fact, one of the things that my psychologist was crying out to me was, I can't speak, you can speak, I can't speak. Because after the Me Too, it's kind of like the cycles. And not only that, I was thinking to say, all the books that are written about psychology are written from the perspective of the psychologist and the testimony of the patient, but there's no collaborative work. And before the things got Epstein land, in the places where I was actually placing some sort of trust in that process, I said, hey, I want to write a book from the perspective of the patient and in collaboration with the psychologist's perspective, which was of course negating what they were trying to do, because I was a targeted individuals and they were scheduled to try to make me look as terrible as possible in whichever documentation they would have on me going to therapy. And basically what I wanted from the perspective of the patient was to shift that power between patient and practitioner to a more sovereign, because that was a part of the healing. And Neptune Aries is going to be a big deal. Patient sovereignty is going to be a big deal. If that's not honored, everything around is going to fall. The British Empire set its national identity on the myth of psychiatry. With decolonization, it was also people sobering up from that myth. And so the loss, the egoic loss, was twofold: a national, a scientific, and egoic. Of many people, that their identity, which is one of the most component that are important psychologically to psychiatric well-being, was being shattered through not only decolonization, but the science itself. In fact, right at this very moment, as people are protesting the British Empire's freedom of speech and digital ID restrictions, they are other people raising the British flag saying we do not agree to disown our national identity or our significant parts of our identity. At this very moment as I'm speaking. By the way, when Neptune ingressed, King Charles was receiving an experimental treatment to cancer. And a lot of people, it went all the way to the fact of me buying Vivianite in a crystal shop, and she's saying, yeah, I knew the psychiatrist of the royal family in Britain. There was such, oh, King Charles is such a nice person. And I'm like, how did she even get to talk about, like, people were really the social engineering all around me. And it says probably because of my thesis, because I was looking into epistemic standards of empiricism in the body mind question in the medicines. I'm sorry that sounds big, but it's basically it basically looking for how do we know that we know what works, and patient sovereignty, embodiment, and so on have been critical factors. And I was doing that fractions before COVID. Okay. Now, if King Charles wants to survive cancer, he's going to have to holistically tend to something to do with inflammation in the brain. And in fact, I was doing at the very same day immediately a reading about King Charles. And it showed the declining prestige that the monarchies have. Because it was such just something, he's a Scorpio, and it was just something, I think he's a Scorpio, and it was just something about the energy that was really flamboyant even. And at the same time, awareness that there's something to do with inflammation. And I think for him, the ninth house was relevant, so it has to do with religion. And when that's the king, it's not something that can be kept secret. Because the holistic meaning of why that happened matters. By the way, for those who are concerned with Trump, there's something to do with bloodletting. Okay, I'm not going to get into that. But I just did. Okay, fine. Um, but that is too fucking important because it's literally the entire United States running on those medical practices. Um, and this is why Americans pay so much for medicine and have no medicine. Women gave birth, they need to be out of the place unless they pay a significant amount of money right after birthing a baby. Sometimes tediously, sometimes life threateningly. Threateningly. And so and this also affects the issue around speech. I remember I had a conversation, I'm not going to elaborate too much on that, where there was an attempt to control my speech, and I said, the silent voices become A-bombs. And the thing is that when those voices speak, it's also it's also atomic. Okay, and that is um, that's a facet of that recovery. And this is how people are going to, and that's important, that the fear that governs the decisions is to be transmuted into courage. So while definitely when people are standing in the light, people try to make all kinds of things around them, and yet their mission has to do with standing in the light. And when people try to bring them supposedly for their safety into the darkness, then what would happen in the darkness is something that they would fear to be exposed in the light. Trust me, I attended to political assassination prevention. They literally kidnap people and their spouses for their security. And they just have to trust. Or they refuse that type of kidnapping, and then the security forces part like denial. Now I know the intricacies, the ritual abuses, okay, I'm just talking about one layer in the mix of it. I had an episode going missing when I delineated CERN and the fact that they were trying to kidnap Mark Rutte into a different timeline, almost to make him go missing. It almost looked like an episode. They're trying to do something to do with the brain because they tried to do to me the same thing because I tended to the attempt to kidnap him and the attempt to assassinate him, and that had to do with CERN, and there was something to do with the Stargate, I guess. So they were trying to use astral projection to brain hack and get him to make him go missing, but they really wanted him missing into a different timeline, like completely something scientific going on here. And I'm like, scientifically, that's interesting. But this is because what he's doing in the WEF and the Bilderberg and Belsen has to do with CERN. Now, maybe that it's not. Maybe it's just invested in that. Like, I really don't know what is it, but CERN came up. And it's not for nothing that Alandra came up, I think, at around the same time I was looking at Mark Rutte's chart. What's the chart? Midheaven with Ketu, Ascendant, Venus 18. I know what it means, but I'm not going to disclose that. Um, and I was talking about CERN. Wait! Of course, my mom interrupted. Remember the NATO episodes that my mom kept interrupting?